Every Sunday morning, my girlfriend and I watch the new One Piece episode together. And even though the anime is not the best adaptation, that almost makes it better for us. It's easy to put on for a light watch while we sip on our coffees and get ready for the day. We know they're gonna drag the scenes out and repeat every reaction at least 3 times, so even if we might be a bit distracted, we're not gonna miss much. But during the latest arc, something changed for me. These episodes became harder and harder to watch, and it wasn't the actual contents of the episodes themselves, but rather the last ending theme that got to me every time. Dear Sunrise, sung by Maki Otsuki, starts off with a shot of Luffy gazing towards the rising sun, with each of the crew members fading in around him in order of their appearance in the series. It's like a modernized version of the very first ending from 25 years ago, also sung by her. It's cute and very nostalgic, but the part right after, the flashback sequence of everyone joining the crew, is where I start to stumble. Luffy's and Zoro's parts at first gently pull me towards the past, but Nami's section marks a point of no return. I have to either distract myself, switch the episode off, or remain in front of the TV and face the consequences. On the days I choose the latter, Usopp, Sanji, and Chopper transport me back to the day I bought my first volume at 9 years old. I was so confused until I realized that One Piece wasn't episodic like the Donald Duck comics I was used to, and once I got past that, there was no stopping me. I even became a bit of a pirate myself when I binged arc after arc on some primitive, shady website I googled my way onto. I used to watch AMVs with friends huddled around the monitor, Linkin Park, Usopp vs Luffy. It's crazy how foreign these memories feel in relation to the One Piece I read today. And this montage of beginnings reminds me of that distance. The sheer vastness of this journey that is slowly sailing towards its inevitable end, and the faint echoes of dreams I had forgotten a long time ago. I'm not sure how I feel about One Piece at this point. On some days, it's a part of me. I mistake the series itself for the memories I've made alongside it for the last 15 years or so, and treat the discourse around it accordingly. When I hear people praise its world building and foreshadowing on podcasts and such, I catch myself feeling this weird, unearned sports fan-like pride within me, and when I see people criticizing it, I feel this combative desire to defend this sacred work from its adversaries. But it's also true that I often agree with those very criticisms, and it annoys me when people do the weirdest mental gymnastics to explain away every problem with the story. One Piece hasn't made me feel the way that it used to in many years. And even though I apparently cannot stop myself from talking about nostalgia on this channel, I don't think this is just me projecting my longing towards a simpler time onto this silly pirate story. But just to make sure and refresh my memory, there's only one thing I should do, and that is to reread every single chapter of this painfully long series, this time setting my attachments to it aside. So, let's get it over with. Alright, I'm back. It took a few weeks, I read it on a tablet, my eyes hurt, and I wouldn't have even needed to read anything to tell you that, of course, One Piece has changed in many ways during its long 27 years of serialization. But there was one particular moment though, which, on the reread, really stood out to me. A beloved classic scene that completely changed how I view the latter half of the story. But bear with me for just a little bit, because before we get to what that moment is, we have to first go all the way to the beginning and start with what I think is the lifeblood of this series for its viewer, its creator, and the fictional world it portrays. Dreams. The ones that you're willing to risk everything for. In One Piece, unless you have dreams running through your veins, you're not going to make it very far in the great pirate era the story takes place in. And Oda makes the importance of this very clear through Luffy and every person he recruits or just becomes friends with. For each of those characters, hidden under all of the trauma and tragedy, there is always a life-sustaining, unreasonable dream that was never abandoned. And it doesn't matter whether these dreams are shackled by psychological, physical, or societal forces. As long as that dream exists, Luffy will liberate it, either through violence or just by the pure aura of his resolve towards his own dream, whether the person wants it or not. And once those chains are broken, there is no point in going back. Nami's dream of sailing the seas and drawing a complete map of the world was buried under layers of grief and coping mechanisms. Self-sacrifice brought on by the environment she found herself in. Her passion for map making was exploited by the very people who murdered her family and subjugated her village. But no matter how many parts of herself she had to kill, she never gave up on the sea. Sanji shared his dream of one day discovering the legendary All Blue with his mentor and father figure Zeff. And it's the weight of guilt and responsibility that's stopping him from pursuing this dream, as the fact that he is alive today came at the cost of Zeff's ability to pursue this dream himself. But even though Sanji attempts to repress it, just one look, seeing his face light up as he talks about the All Blue, is enough to tell you that there is only one way he should be going. Having a dream like wanting to cure the world of all of its diseases is tragic by its nature, and the path Chopper took to realizing what he wants to spend his life doing is, I think, the saddest sequence of chapters in the entirety of the story. Chopper was rejected by everyone around him for no reason other than his strange appearance, and the only person who accepted him was a messed up, terminally ill fake doctor with delusional dreams of curing the hearts of the country. It's a clumsy relationship where Chopper just wants to be loved by Dr. Hiruluk, who in turn would do anything not to hurt Chopper, going as far as kicking him out to save him the grief of his soon arriving death, and willingly getting poisoned by him when he returns tattered with a deadly mushroom he mistook for a cure. And when Dr. Hiruluk makes his final sacrifice for his dream, it's fucking beautiful. All of these dreams are. And they are not just simple, far-off goals for these characters to pursue. They are the evidence that they have not been squashed by this messed up world they inhabit, and the reason these characters are who they are and do what they do. And they are so important, in fact, that if they were to be lost or crushed over time, in Oda's eyes, it would result in a fate as painful as death. Jaya Smoketown is a lawless pirate village where material representations, your wealth and the price on your head, decide your place on the social hierarchy. Wanting to keep a low profile as this is just a temporary stopping point for the crew, Nami tells Zoro and Luffy not to get into any fights here. And they manage to just barely keep that promise until they make their way into a bar where the Bellamy pirates mistakenly underestimate them based on outdated wanted posters. But right as Luffy and Zoro are about to defend themselves, Nami, just hoping to get at least some information before it's too late, asks the bartender if he knows anything about the mythical Sky Islands they're headed towards. And the response is pure ridicule from everyone around them. Nami's reaction here reminds me of like a kid who feels ashamed over their naivety, for saying the wrong thing and not thinking like an adult. But Luffy and Zoro are here to show once again what kind of story One Piece is at its core. And Nami does get her wish. The Straw Hats will not be fighting. Not this time. They tank Bellamy's punches, knowing that the pain they feel now is nothing. Just a bit of envy spilling out from the damaged soul of this washed-up rookie. Fools who are blinded by fantasy cannot see the treasures lying at their feet. Bellamy is telling on himself by saying this. He literally does not believe in castles in the sky. He is stagnant, content forever pursuing things beneath him, and thus to a true dreamer like Luffy, his outburst is not even worth the violence. He's hurt enough. As Nami drags these beaten and bloodied heroes out of the bar, the trio is interrupted by Blackbeard calling out to them. And when Luffy stands up to face him, he is confronted by the very same philosophy upon which he decided not to fight just moments ago. And unlike his usual demeanor, he is completely speechless and paralyzed in its presence. It could be fear, deep reflection, or just him realizing that he's standing in front of a true pirate. It's tough to gauge exactly what he's feeling here, but whatever it is, it's in reaction to something powerful and captivating. The very same force that runs through the heart of this story, and the same idea I found so compelling when I read that first volume all those years ago. One Piece is special in how accessible this fantasy it offers is. You don't need to be anyone important. The freedom achieved through the pursuit of a dream is right there for even the most cowardly, weak, and voiceless, and Luffy transcends the page in instilling that idea. It's not surprising to me that One Piece's fans defend it so passionately. It places value on the vulnerable aspects of yourself that don't fit in with others' expectations, and it derives a part of its appeal from the reader's acceptance of this premise. And as you watch Luffy break down those limiting societal structures over and over again, it's hard not to buy into it. Whether he's aware of it or not, his role in the story is making sure that anyone he comes in contact with, you included, never lets their silly dreams fade away. But then, to get to where we're going, we have to talk about the one character who flipped this dynamic on its head. Zoro made a promise with his childhood rival that one of them would become the strongest swordsman in the world. A pact Zoro was left to carry alone when Kuina passed away at only 11 years old. Out of all the Straw Hats, excluding maybe Luffy, Zoro is by far the hungriest for his dream, and he considers his life to be surrendered for its sake in a very literal and straightforward way. If there is an enemy or a challenge that would bring Zoro closer to his dream, no matter how dangerous or pointless it might be, the choice has already been made for him by himself on the day he inherited the other half of that promise. He either dies or just takes another step towards his goal. I'm reminding you of this because Zoro's level of commitment is an important detail to keep in mind to frame the sequence of events that begin at chapter 483, the end of the dream. Immediately after the defeat of Moria, Bartholomew Kuma attacks the wounded Straw Hat crew while Luffy is unconscious. Zoro is the best chance they have for survival, but once Kuma effortlessly wipes the floor with him, the gravity of the situation becomes clear to everyone present. Kuma explains that he's here only for Luffy, and he's willing to let the rest live if they give up their captain in exchange. The crew gives their obvious, unanimous answer, and Kuma responds to it by nuking the place, leaving only Sanji, Zoro, and himself left in the fight. Real desperation setting in, Zoro starts bargaining with Kuma, saying that someday he could have become the strongest swordsman, and while he's not as big of a name as Luffy is, he asks if Kuma could take his head instead. It's Zoro being his self-destructive self once again, but this time the reason has nothing to do with his dream, and it's not only about protecting his captain either. Zoro is willing to die here and let his promise stay forever unfulfilled, because he truly believes that Luffy will become the king of the pirates. And Kuma, impressed by his resolve, extracts the pain and suffering from the unconscious Luffy and gives him a taste of what it means to carry the weight of his captain's dream. And then, nothing happens. This is character development, not just for Zoro. The inclusion of Sanji in the scene indicates to me that any veteran members of the crew would do the same if they were put in this position. It's a noble, selfless thing to do, and it just makes sense considering the hell these pirates have been through together. But there is another, less obvious side to this. This moment, and especially the reasoning Zoro gives here, illustrate a characteristic of dreams that would become very emblematic for the rest of this story. The idea that some dreams are more important than your own, and that the most powerful dreams are capable of engulfing everything around them. There's this semi-viral clip from a lecture by philosopher Gilles Deleuze about cinema, where he mentions this idea of the danger of being devoured by someone else's dream, and how each one of us is a victim to the dreams of others. I like this clip not only because he sounds very cool and ominous as hell when he says this, but also because the idea, not unlike One Piece, gives the dreams themselves this mystical power that can reach over into reality. And it's also an interesting angle from which to consider how our lives have been shaped by the ambitions of other people around us and how that gets portrayed in media. The comment section of this clip on YouTube is filled with Berserk references for obvious reasons. And Luffy, even though he is a charismatic captain with a big dream, he's not a Griffith type of character, nor is One Piece a Berserk type of story. But still, somewhere underneath all of the Nakama power and Kumer jokes, I can detect some faint traces of a similar energy permeating the story. Both of these characters are leaders who want to become kings with a loyal group of friends around them who are willing to lay down their lives to make that happen. But while Berserk directly explores the idea of being devoured by someone else's dream, in One Piece, this devouring happens subtly, most likely unintentionally beneath the surface. Luffy's dream does not result in a single-use Eclipse-style rug pull moment, but rather acts like a slowly growing black hole following Luffy around, warping and distorting every aspect of the story around its gravitational pull. And I see Zoro's bargain as Oda for the first time acknowledging and embracing its existence. And just as a warning, this is the part of the video where, if you're the kind of fan that I sometimes am, you might start feeling a little angry, which is fine, and feel free to express that in the comments if you want to. But I'd like you to remember that you're not under attack here. It's just me talking about the story that I like. The first victims of Luffy's dream's gravitational force were the characters, specifically the Straw Hat crew and their respective dreams, their reasons for setting forth to the Grand Line they proclaimed to the world during the iconic barrel scene. As immediately after this moment, most of them were functionally cut from the story. And that's not that surprising, as One Piece is ultimately about Luffy finding the One Piece, and it's also about Nakama, camaraderie, so I was never expecting these characters to just up and leave to do their own thing. But the issue isn't that they don't actively pursue these dreams. It's that they don't talk about them, or even seemingly think about them, despite the fact that they're the reason they're on this boat in the first place. Nami does not talk about or draw maps. It took Oda 10 years from the barrel to bring up the All Blue again, and when he finally did, it was only as a throwaway line to add some extra flavor to a classic Sanji pervert gag. And then it took another 6 years for the next mention. Usopp's dream of becoming a brave warrior of the sea wasn't left out of the story entirely, but any progress he would make towards it would be periodically reset, as being a coward became his signature comedic character trait. And after Chopper, the dreams of new crewmates would be consumed by Luffy's from their inception, as in, they would in the first place only be allowed dreams that were byproducts of the larger goal waiting at the end of the journey. And finally, after Zoro's bargain, Oda reduced the importance of new crewmates' dreams to the point that he no longer found it necessary to even directly introduce them to us. This doesn't mean that Jinbei is dreamless. It's not hard to figure out what his dream could be, but it never got a barrel scene or any single direct mention during the 15 years he's been a part of this story. Jinbei is also an interesting character for me because despite his connection to Luffy and the time we've spent with him, he doesn't really feel like a fully developed crew member to me compared to the others adjusted for their time spent in the crew. And I don't think that's because he doesn't have a well-defined comedic trait or because the pace has gotten slower, but because he's a character who was introduced after the importance of moving through the arc. Getting to know the temporary characters and details necessary for driving the story forwards eclipsed the ordinary chapter-to-chapter crewmate interactions. If you go back and read some of the earlier arcs, it's like night and day. The crew talks to each other all the time, not only about what they are reacting to in their immediate environment, but also what they're thinking about outside of it. About ideas and memories, things that make these characters feel like actual people. And this is not just vibes-based analysis. I went back and counted every panel where a crew member says something that's not just a quick reaction to whatever's happening in front of them to another crew member from one early arc, Drum Island, and one later arc, Dressrosa. And Dressrosa had like a couple of interactions less than Drum Island did, somewhere around 50 for the both of them, which makes it sound like it's not a huge difference, until you remember that Dressrosa is 4 times as long as Drum Island is. It's not just nostalgia. These conversations actually became way less frequent, and as a result, for large phases of the latter half of the series, the crewmates feel almost like pre-programmed automatons, just reacting to things around them and periodically clocking in to perform their mandatory underling fights and character gags, just so we don't forget that Usopp is still a coward and Sanji is still a weirdo. And by the way, this is unrelated, but let me talk about the gags for a little longer, cause something weird happened to the comedy during Fishman Island, and I have no other place to talk about it. Like, before I got to this point, I was having a good time giggling, kicking my legs like every couple of chapters at the goofy shit that Oda came up with. And Shabondi 1 and 2 were like peak One Piece silliness with the Duval and fake Straw Hat bits, which are genuinely hilarious. But I think something about the extended Sanji nosebleed gag, combined with the depravity of resurfacing his dream after a decade in this context, must have unlocked some hidden part of Oda's brain, because in the next arc over, he like quadrupled down on the pervert jokes. As if Sanji and Brook weren't doing enough, he gave Kinemon and Momonosuke these kinds of gags to spice things up, which I guess this is supposed to be funny because he's 8 years old, but for me personally though, every time that happened, it kind of made me want to eat 2 devil fruits. But Oda didn't stop there. He also added the fucking law body swap multiplier to make this shit extra freaky. And finally, as the cherry on top, had Smoker and Tashigi participate in this shit as a final humiliation ritual before they were effectively erased from the story. Which is very funny, but probably not in the way that Goda intended. And even though there are some jokes that still get a chuckle out of me, I don't think they ever truly recovered since this point. After Zoro's bargain, Luffy's dream started to reach past the characters into the underlying systems and lore of this world, bending them around it, specifically in ways that would make our path towards it a more obvious and straightforward one. And again, Luffy is the main character, so these kinds of changes are not surprising either. But where problems arise is in how they happen, and what gets sacrificed for their sake. If you look at the people, organizations, and supernatural forces in the story, it's easy to divide them into 2 opposing sides based on their relationship with dreams and freedom. The Revolutionary Army, the Straw Hat Crew, and other pirates like them are offset by the oppressive world government and other affiliated groups. And this is no longer just a popular fan theory. The power of the devil fruits, which, according to Vegapunk, are manifestations of dreams, are balanced by the ocean, which considers them unnatural. But the first of 2 major tweaks Oda made to this balance was the introduction of Haki as a power system. Now personally, I'm not a huge fan of Haki. I think it's confusing and it doesn't make for strategic fights. It's another counter to Devil Fruits, and by proxy, it's a new anti-Dream Force in the story. This time one that, unlike Seastone, is wielded by characters on both sides of the Freedom Divide. And after its introduction, it of course doesn't take long for us to find out that Luffy actually has the rarest Supreme King's Haki that can be used only by a very select few who are born with it. Now, if we were heading towards the direction where we learned that Devil Fruits could hijack people's dreams, as in the dream of the fruit would replace the dream of the person who eats it, Haki and its thematic implications would make more sense to me. But in the way that the story works now, it just feels weird that Luffy not only consumes the dreams of the people around him because Oda sees his dream as more important, but also that he gets to, within the power system logic of the world, suppress dreams or manifestations of them through his Haki, the representation of the weight of his own dream and destiny. Destiny also plays a part in the other significant tweak, the addition of Joy Boy to the lore of One Piece. Now, we don't know who and what Joy Boy really is at this point, but we have the classic Oda silhouette plus a list of vague facts about him. He was the first pirate, he fought and lost a war against the world government 800 years ago, and he also made sure to preserve the ancient weapons that could raise the sea levels by 200 meters, which is very anti-dream of him based on what we know about the ocean. He was also a god-level Haki user, and his Devil Fruit allowed him to take on the form of the sun god Nika. Where he connects to Luffy is in his prophesied return, as 25 chapters after Nika is mentioned for the first time, 25 years into the story, Luffy's Devil Fruit awakens, and we find out that it's actually not the Gum Gum fruit after all, but rather the Nika fruit, the exact same one that Joy Boy had eaten. And ever since the awakening, the government and all characters who are aware of the history basically treat Luffy as the reincarnation of this historical warrior of liberation, destined to do something. Compared to this, Haki was only like another tool for Luffy to punch himself a path towards pirate kinghood the way he wants to do it. But this shit, Luffy's transformation into this prophesied divine figure, whether he accepts this destiny in the end or not, puts the story on railway tracks with Joy Boy in the driver's seat, taking us towards the inevitable clash between these two opposing forces of the world. The story feels much more streamlined now, which is not in itself necessarily a bad thing. We're heading towards the end and this is one way to get there. But especially in a story as long as this one, the shortness of the time that Nika was allowed to exist before it was connected to Luffy makes this all feel a bit undercooked to me. There are also consequences to moving Luffy's dream and destiny to the forefront through these kinds of changes that reach beyond what happens in the story. It's more subtle, but over time the fundamental values of what is portrayed as good and empowering have shifted from where they were in the beginning. No matter how desperate your situation is, your dream is your sanctuary and your path to greatness. Breaking the oppressive structures that limit that is what our heroes still do, but there is a difference in who these paths are open to. It's clear that Luffy always had a destiny. He was born into a special family, Shanks gave him the hat, and the world is on his side in mysterious ways when he most needs it. But he was also just a kid with a silly robber ability trying to chase his dream, alongside friends with dreams of their own. And when this Luffy, no matter if he's shipless or crewless, keeps telling everyone he comes across that he's going to become the king of the pirates, it's the irrationality of his confidence, and the way that One Piece portrays it as powerful that makes him genuinely inspiring. But it's different when his friends' dreams have been left behind for his sake. It feels hollow when he says this as the chosen one among chosen ones, a one in a several million Haki user with a super special devil fruit that turns him into a prophesied god warrior. The accessibility of the fantasy I spoke about in the last chapter, the freedom granted by the pursuit of a dream, was left behind a long time ago. The philosophy Zoro and Luffy stood for in Mocktown no more reflects what this series is about, and in its place we have hastily executed generic shonen tropes. And next to those tropes, dreams no longer hold value on their own, and nothing short of a divine destiny is required for them to mean anything. This value shift is present even in the aesthetics of the power systems. Devil fruits turn imagination into reality. They represent the unique, endless possibilities that lie within every dreamer, but Haki conveys something very different. Its homogeneous, colorless strength stemming from pure willpower. It renders the manifestations of dreams defenseless, and when it's exerted by the Supreme King, it robs the weak-minded common people and animals of their agency. This is the duality of Luffy, the dream-liberating defender of freedom, and his dream's oppressive, all-engulfing impact on the course of the story. I'm sure Oda will attempt to tie all the dreams together in the end in a way that makes sense, but it's not a question to me that One Piece has changed, and the reread worked only to solidify my opinion. But you'll find people argue up and down that it's been this way the whole time, and if you scroll down, you'll probably find them angrily posting away in the comments of this video if it reaches that section of the One Piece fandom. To those people, if you're someone who thinks that Luffy being saved by lightning in Loguetown already made him as much of a chosen one as Nika did, or if you're someone who truly believes that Haki was intentionally introduced in the first chapter and Oda only happened to mention it in the context of it being a power system 10 years into the story, or if you're totally content with the Straw Hats probably talking about their dreams off screen somewhere. If the jokes still make you laugh, I'm not going to try to convince you otherwise. I have no beef with you, and I'm genuinely happy that you get to experience One Piece in the way that you do. For me, I haven't experienced it in that way for years, and so I'm more interested in the why. Why did Oda do this? Why did he leave all those dreams behind? To find an answer, I dove into old BBS forums, wikis and Reddit posts and read pretty much every Oda interview or detached quote that I could find, and I stumbled onto a feasible explanation for nearly everything almost immediately. In 2009, right around the time skip, Oda expressed in multiple interviews varying levels of a desire to finish One Piece as soon as possible. And the story decisions made around this time make sense for someone who is trying to clear out an exit path through a room filled with stacks of unresolved character arcs and very good, but complicated ideas. Oda himself has admitted that he has struggles with the amount of characters he's added to One Piece. So it adds up why he cut down on the thoughtful dialogue and boiled down characters' personalities into only their most recognizable traits. It makes sense why Oda doesn't waste panel space on Nami drawing maps. The series doesn't end because her map is completed. It ends when Luffy does his thing, and Zoro's bargain tells us that we shouldn't expect anything else. Haki as a power system is also just way more efficient to work with than Devil Fruits are. It does whatever Oda needs it to do, and gives the crew an easy get-out-of-jail-free card when facing a powerful Devil Fruit user like Caesar, for example. While personally, I think it would have been cool to see Nami trap him with air pressure manipulation or literally any strategy that would have used the crew's existing abilities, there's no need for that. Oda no longer has to put time into coming up with unique logical solutions like he did for Crocodile and Enel, because with Haki in the picture, Luffy always has the option to win by just punching very hard and very fast. Leaning into the chosen one trope also makes it easier to guide the story towards an ending that's more engaging than just sailing to Laugh Tale and beating everyone on the way. These can all be looked at as just economical decisions to simplify and accelerate the story, but that alone is not enough. If he started flirting with ending One Piece in 2009, why is it still going strong 15 years later? Why the fuck did he spend such a long time in Dressrosa and Wano, even though he's been very determined not to let anyone extend One Piece beyond what is necessary? And why is that, despite every annoying nitpick I have, I still show up to read every new chapter expecting to like it? I think the explanation for each of these questions lies within Oda's relationship with his own dream, which is just as double-edged as the portrayal of dreams in his story. And to understand that better, we have to look at how One Piece got to where it is today. Eiichiro Oda wanted to become a mangaka because he believed that they wouldn't have to do any real work. He was 4 when he thought that, but he never let go of the idea, and once he got to high school, despite his fear of disapproval from people around him, he started applying to some one-shot competitions, including the Tezuka Awards, in which he got second place. Oda then used that accomplishment to get a one-shot published in Monthly Shonen Jump, and eventually started working as an assistant for other established mangaka while trying to get his own manga serialized in the weekly magazine. And from what Oda has shared from the early parts of his career, you can tell that this was a very difficult time for him. He struggled for years, working through rejection after rejection, and even though he had made some small waves with Romance Dawn, he was on the verge of quitting and going back to school to become a regular salaryman. But his editor, Takanori Asada, seeing how hard he was working, wasn't going to give up on him this easily. And after Asada spent multiple months arguing back and forth with Jump, they were finally given the opportunity, partly out of pity from the magazine's editor-in-chief, to serialize One Piece in '97. At 22 years of age, Oda had achieved his dream. And not only that, One Piece became massive almost immediately, shooting up to the top of the popularity ranking the next year. Early One Piece was written by a person who, after years of struggle and self-doubt, managed to finally make his dream come true. A dream he had held close to his heart since he was only 4 years old. And it reads that way as well. It sincerely believes in this mystical power that resides within people's dreams, and early Luffy embodies that childlike energy that gives life to them. But when you look at Oda's creative process and the way he's talked about his work 10-20 years into his career, there's just no way One Piece could have stayed like this. Oda doesn't really plan, and in fact, the only thing he has properly planned out is the ending, which hasn't changed a single time since before One Piece began. And also, he's never been interested in passing forwards a deep, consistent message or a meaningful lesson, and instead, he just wants to draw cool shit and create something that'll help people make friendships and connections with each other. Now, this of course doesn't mean that there aren't any real messages within this story. Sure, they might not always be cohesive, but everything that happens in it, in the way that it does, is influenced by Oda's worldview, which unavoidably is reflected in his art, even if he claims he's not trying to say anything. When it comes to the darker sides of working for a magazine like Jump, Oda very rarely directly complains about anything. But if you've ever looked at what goes into creating 19-page chapters weekly, you'd know that it's probably not how he envisioned it when he was 4. It's an unimaginably brutal gig. And things like his aversion towards planning might make more sense when you consider that during his career, his ideas have often been shot down by his editors, forcing him to come up with something new, sometimes with pretty much no time to spare. The most well-known extreme case of this was the introduction of the supernovas, when his editor at the time didn't find Shabondi interesting enough on its own, So Oda had to scramble to design all 11 of these characters right before the release of the chapter where they were introduced. Which, I guess, is no biggie to Goda, as he managed to do this in just 3 hours. Which consequently, according to multiple different interviews over many stages of One Piece, has also been the amount of hours that Oda usually sleeps per night to cope with his workload. Which, me personally, I need at least 8 to function like a human being, so I don't know. I'm not built like that, but still, there's no fucking way that's good in the long term for anyone. But Oda doesn't actually describe those things as necessarily negative. But when an actual complaint makes its way through from in between the stacks of regular questions and answers, it's almost always pretty heartbreaking. It's very sad to see Oda, someone who created a world as vibrant as One Piece, lament the fact that he never gets to go outside anymore. Someone who's been creating this beloved story for decades, say that he finds the process of writing it to be painful. It's sad that he doesn't get to spend time with his kids, that there have been years when his schedule has been so brutal that he's only been able to visit his own home once. Earlier on, Oda seemed to be pretty excited to start working on a spin-off or a new robot-themed manga after One Piece, but in more recent interviews when asked about any plans, he shuts it down immediately. Of course, post-timeskip would feel different. It was written by someone who still enjoys drawing, but describes writing stories as painful. Someone who has mentally and physically caught up with the day-to-day realities of his dream after working on the same story for 10 plus years. A story he'd like to finish as soon as possible, at a pace that puts people in hospitals pretty often in the manga industry. And it also reads that way. It looks at people's dreams as something to be set aside in the face of more sensible purposes. This is a man's dream put through an exponentially hungry money machine that discards young talent at the first sign of weakness. I'm sure you can imagine how, in a place like that, it'd be susceptible to being consumed by other forces, more important dreams of how things should be beyond one's control. But for every comment about wanting to get to the end faster, there's another about him struggling with limiting the amount of things he wants to draw. For every story decision made for economical purposes, there are moments that emerge from a different source. And for every aspect of the story that doesn't resonate with me, there are parts that remind me of why I got into it in the first place. When I see Sanji trying to light his cigarette in the rain, Luffy being his freest self, or an arc branching into 5 different directions that are going to take years to resolve, I feel like I catch a glimpse of it. Sure, it might have been through a lot, but I'd like to think that his dream is still there. That it's the reason why, after everything, I'm still here, every week, waiting for the new chapter. One Piece Fan Letter is a 24-minute filler side story released in October 2024, created by the people responsible for some of the best episodes in the modern anime. The story takes place during the Return to Shabondi arc, but instead of who you would expect, it focuses on nameless, regular people who view pirates as these famous celebrities they can look up to. I think it's the best One Piece related piece of media released in the last decade. And yes, the action, the animation, the direction are all incredible, but what is at the core of this side story is a touching portrayal of what it's like to like One Piece. And if you're someone who used to be a fan, it's 100% worth checking out. Before I started to reread, I said I would leave my attachments to One Piece aside. But that's not how these kinds of things work. The memories, the good and the bad, are undetachable. They are a part of me even if I try to pretend they're not for a video. I've been every character in this fan letter. I've sat at the power scaler's table making nonsense arguments in support of my favorite characters. That's why it hurts to see them reduced into these easily repeatable, hollow punchlines. I've been given genuine courage by this story, which is why when I listen to Golden Odin, I feel a tinge of regret for speaking my mind so openly in this video. I've been inspired to consider my own dreams. This story is important to me, which is why Dear Sunrise, seeing the signs of it getting closer towards its end, makes me a bit emotional. As far as dreams go, Oda's seems like a pretty sweet one. It's a dream of telling stories and connecting people through art, and sure, it's capable of consuming as well. Some form their entire personalities and careers around it. People spend their free time arguing over every minute detail of every panel that flows out of Oda's pen, and it has even taken control of my life on some occasions. Most recently for the months I spent on making this video, but I had a good time with it. I'm only going to stop reading One Piece when it ends, no matter what direction it takes. Someone with a more cynical view towards art consumption might call this a fallacy of sunk costs. And yes, this is the result of the time and passion I've spent on this story. But there is no fallacy here. One Piece is far from perfect. The system in which it's produced is not conducive to long-term perfection. But even if it might disappoint me, I want to see the end that Oda envisioned when his dream started to become a reality almost 3 decades ago. The finale he had in his mind when he gave everything to the story. I want to see what awaits at the end of that dream.